Scott, I want you to sort of stand by for us because we're going to fold in CBS News Chief White House Correspondent Nancy Cordes. Now, Nancy, you are currently the Chief White House Correspondent, but before that, you spent a lot of time in the hallways of Congress, and I imagine interacted with Senator Dianne Feinstein a lot. When I ask you about kind of the type of lawmaker she was, the way she carried herself in the Senate, how would you describe her?
Yes, I started covering Congress in 2008 when she was really at the peak of her power and effectiveness, Anne Marie. She was really a master legislator, and the breadth of issues that she dealt with and made significant progress on is really singular when you look at senators over the past 20 years and what she was able to achieve. I mean, she worked very hard on automotive fuel efficiency as a senator from California, legalizing gay marriage. She was at the forefront of that movement. Gun safety legislation. She was credited by President Biden as being one of the driving forces behind the assault weapons ban that was signed into law in the mid-90s. She got a major cybersecurity bill passed. She was the driving force behind getting questionable interrogation practices outlawed. She was someone who went very deep on the issues that she cared about and had a very significant career even before she came to Congress. She was the first woman mayor of San Francisco. She served in that role for nearly 10 years. She was recognized as one of the most effective mayors in the country. And then she came to Capitol Hill. She was the longest serving female senator ever. She was the first woman to chair the Senate Intelligence Committee. This is a woman whose intellect, whose drive was formidable, and I think that that's something that people tend to forget because she was somewhat diminished in recent years and didn't have the same kind of authority that she had not that long ago. But this is someone who people who have served in the Senate for a long time will be mourning the passage of today because she was so effective and they admired her so greatly for it. President Biden, not long ago, when she announced that she was going to be retiring from the Senate, Anne Marie, put out a statement. He said, "I've served with more U.S. senators than just about anyone. I can honestly say that Dianne Feinstein is one of the very best."
And as you're listing off some of her legislative accomplishments and some of her legislative fights, the word that's actually coming to mind is courage. That, some of these topics were probably not comfortable for her to bring up, to point out that, Americans may be participating in torture, and that is wrong. To be critical of this country in that way, I imagine, there were times where she took criticism from the Republican Party, but probably from members of her own party as well.
Sure. And, she was really a dog with a bone. Her crusade when it came to interrogation practices lasted for 6 years, from when they began investigating the kinds of interrogation practices that had been used after 9/11 at Abu Ghraib, in Iraq and Afghanistan. And she fought tooth and nail to get access to documents at the CIA, at the Pentagon. There were all kinds of restrictions that were put in place. They were not allowed to take any of those documents out of the buildings. And so she came up with a workaround to basically send staffers to sit in these small rooms day and night and pore over these documents and take their own notes and bring the notes out with them because they weren't able to actually get any kinds of copies of these classified documents. Certainly the powers that be were not trying to make this any easier for her, but she stuck with it when it was a popular cause, when it was not a popular cause, and finally put out a report that ended up changing policy in the United States. So she was someone who did not give up, even years after the assault weapons ban lapsed. And it was clear that the support did not exist on Capitol Capitol Hill to reinstate it, she continued to advocate for it. She continued to hold press conferences about it. She continued to talk about things that she would like to do because she believed, even though the votes weren't there at that moment, that they might be there at some point in the future, and she needed to keep the issue alive.
I want to pivot back to Scott, who's still sort of standing by for us. Scott, as I understand, there are a number of tributes pouring in now.
Yeah, and pardon me as I read some of them from my phone because they're coming in with such a velocity right now. Senator Mark Warner, fellow Democrat, fellow member of that Senate Intelligence Committee, Nancy referenced, says he's heartbroken by this passing. She leaves behind an incredible legacy, breaking barriers for women and taking real action against gun violence, as you were referencing. Republicans, too. This is a bipartisan moment. It always is when the Senate loses one of its members. Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin says she was a very gracious person to work with. His deepest condolences. The same from Senators Rick Scott and Marsha Blackburn, both Republicans. The prayers are with her family. She is a woman who was a trailblazer in politics. This is it's a moment to remember Dianne Feinstein. Her absences this year, though, were scrutinized. The fact that she was working with frail health was a real-world issue for the functioning of government. The margins have been so narrow here for several years. Democrats with a slim majority, with just a vote or two to spare on anything, had to move things around during her absences. When she wasn't here, the Senate Judiciary Committee almost ground to a halt because Republicans had even numbers with Democrats on that committee, and they paused some of the operations of that committee when she wasn't here. So her health challenges, sad to watch, challenging to watch, were also impactful on the functioning of the Democratic majority and the Senate itself. There will have to be, in short order, a replacement for Senator Feinstein until the election in November 2024 to continue the functioning of the U.S. Senate. But at this moment, this tragic moment, there is a bipartisan outpouring for somebody who was a lion of the U.S. Senate almost from the jump, from as soon as she got here.
And just kind of getting some information about, and you pointed out that she was around there on the Capitol, that according to Senate records, she voted at 11:45 at the 11:45 a.m. roll call vote yesterday, but did not vote on 2 votes later on in the day. Scott, I imagine that it must have been challenging for some of these other lawmakers who have worked with her for decades, and either Scott or Nancy can chime in on this, who had worked with her for decades, knew her sort of at the height of her ability to move legislation, to have the conversation with her about whether or not she should continue to serve. It wasn't a conversation that they were having in front of the cameras, but I know you guys know there were conversations behind the scenes.
Yeah, and I've heard those concerns in the past, but they were more muted in the past. There was a senator from West Virginia who was here at a very senior stage who had difficulty moving around the Capitol and communicating at the end. A senator from Mississippi at a very senior age who had severe health challenges, had difficulty even getting to the Capitol. And I'll go back to what Speaker Pelosi said earlier this year. Why are these calls so powerful when it's Senator Feinstein? I think there's a couple things worth keeping in mind, and Nancy saw this as well as anybody. Senator Feinstein's frail state, the way she was muted at the end, was such a contrast to how she carried herself here for so long. There are some members of the Senate who actually do cut a low profile deliberately. That was not Senator Feinstein. She was a leader. She was a vocal proponent of progressive priorities legislatively. She was a force here. So it was such a noticeable contrast at the end. I wonder if Nancy agrees to see her so muted.
It was noticeable, Scott, and I'd say starting around 2017, 2018, I'd have to go back to my notes, I started talking to staffers, even some of her staffers who were expressing concerns that she was losing a step, that she was forgetting things sometimes, that she was repeating herself sometimes. But I think the fact that she was such a workhorse caused her to want to keep going. And sometimes it's the person who is ill who is the last to recognize that they are losing a step, that they are struggling. And that was the case for her. There were people who were flagging the situation to her, who were asking her gently whether she would like to step back from her role. And she was the one who was saying, no, I'm fine. I want to keep going, even when it was clear that she wasn't fine. And ultimately, you cannot force someone from this role if they don't want to go. I think that was compounded by the fact that the California governor clearly didn't want to be put in the position of anointing someone to fill in for her, particularly when we are so close to an election in 2024. He would much rather he would rather leave that to the voters of California than put his thumb on the scale for one of the many individuals who are clamoring to take her place, because that is so powerful. That is a really powerful endorsement of one individual over all the others. Obviously, whoever is appointed to this role now will have a leg up in 2024. So Gavin Newsom is going to have a difficult decision ahead of him. Does he put in place a caretaker? That's something we've seen governors do before. Does he put in place someone who doesn't want to run in 2024 so that the playing field remains level for the other individuals who have expressed their interest? Or does he feel very strongly about one particular individual and give them a leg up? And there is a wrinkle. In the past, he has said that he would appoint a black woman to that role. And so that limits his choices as well, and and also creates an entirely new political dynamic here. So it'll be very interesting to watch what the governor of California now does with this major decision that he has on his hands.
Yeah, indeed. And just sort of remind people what we are talking about now. We learned earlier this morning that Dianne Feinstein has passed away, longest serving female senator in U.S. history. She's 90 years old, but had maybe guys from the beginning of the year been suffering from a number of health issues. She was away from Washington for quite a while, though she insisted that she had still been working, and perhaps she was working remotely like a lot of people, but has really been struggling over the last few months health-wise. And some of what we have been talking about is her vast resume, the many, many accomplishments. And when you've been sitting in the Senate for that long, you have been a participant in almost every sort of major change that has happened in this country. We're talking same-sex marriage. We're talking, gun legislation. And so we've got like a bit of a highlight here. I can't imagine what the highlight reel will look like for her, because I was trying to look at this list of legislative accomplishments and determine which one was the most impactful. And it's really hard to tell. We talked about, calling out the CIA for torture tactics. We talked about legislation having to do with gun legislation. It's been quite a storied career.
And, Anne-Marie, because of her own personal story, she came into Congress with sort of a unique authority on some of these issues. The reason that she became mayor of San Francisco was because of this infamous assassination that killed the mayor of San Francisco and the gay rights leader, Harvey Milk. And so she came into Congress as something of an authority on LGBT issues. It was something that had affected her profoundly. Obviously, gun issues as well, because of her unique experience, once again, in San Francisco and what she witnessed and what she lived through. And she sort of put those personal experiences to work. She wasn't a showboater. She didn't walk around sort of woe is me about what she had been through. She simply put that personal experience to work towards the policy issues that she cared about, and she was remarkably effective at translating that into policy, actually authoring this legislation. President Biden said that a lot of times when he was in the room with her, she was the only woman in the room, particularly in the beginning. She was elected in the year of the woman in 1992. Before that, there hadn't been very many women in Congress. And so she had to sort of blaze a trail, and she put her head down and did it.
And I wonder if within the LGBTQ plus community too, if she is definitely going to be fondly remembered, and there will be grieving, because when I look at the time span that she has been representing members of the community, when we look at the rise of AIDS, as we talked about, while she was working in San Francisco, and then all the way to present day the same-sex marriage and the issues associated with that, she's really been kind of a friend of the LGBTQ plus community. Scott, to weigh in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to step on Nancy's toes there, but certainly, just her pioneering work in the city of San Francisco shouldn't be lost either, where she stepped into a void after a political assassination in a traumatized city and immediately led it and became a formative figure, not just in that city, but for the entire community, the Bay Area, and for the entire state. It was no surprise she succeeded in winning that Senate seat. And there's just this dueling reality of the moment, where you see the U.S. Senate paying honor to their long-term colleague, to their mentor in some cases, but at the same time, there's a very real moment occurring here in her absence. There is a distinctively narrow margin in the U.S. Senate until her successor is in place. This may, to a degree, keep Bob Menendez around here a little bit longer. Bob Menendez, who yesterday met with his own colleagues, 30 of whom in the Senate Democratic caucus have called for him to resign, one of whom said he'd try to expel Bob Menendez, is now the margin of majority himself for Democrats in the U.S. Senate until Senator Feinstein's successor is here. There are any number of close votes a-coming to keep the government from shutting down or to reopen it after it closes. Any number of nominations to the courts, any number of procedural and legislative matters that are coming. The margin is already excruciatingly small for Senate Democrats. Dianne Feinstein has passed. There's a procedure that's needed before her successor can be put in place, this placeholder who'll hold the job till the next election. And Senator Bob Menendez now measures the majority for Senate Democrats.
That's a really interesting point, how people's fortunes can turn from day to day on Capitol Hill. I'll ask Nancy to sort of kind of respond to that, how crucial this is when every vote is so tight now. To have a member missing can be the difference between a really long, protracted fight or a really, really, really long, protracted fight.
Exactly, and it means, for example, that the vice president will probably have to spend more time in Washington, D.C., because she might be called upon to serve as a tiebreaker in the U.S. Senate more frequently than usual. And I think Scott brought up a really great point. What's going to happen in the Senate now over the next few weeks could look a lot like what happened in the House with George Santos, another individual who was under a legal cloud, who was being investigated, but Speaker McCarthy was reluctant to call him out or push him out because his majority in the House was so narrow. So we have seen that on both sides now. And the big question will be, how quickly does California's Governor Gavin Newsom move to fill this seat? I mean, we are facing in 24 hours the possibility of a government shutdown. And the Senate is going to be taking some crucial votes that will potentially determine whether the lights stay on in government or not. And so this is not some esoteric question. It may be that the governor is called upon to name a successor within 24 or 48 hours. I remember when Senator Daniel Inouye passed away back in 2012. And that left Democrats down one at a similarly crucial time. It was December of 2012, and we were up against what was known then as the fiscal cliff, and facing a similar deadline in Congress. And so the governor of Hawaii named a successor who ended up flying back on Air Force One with President Obama, who was vacationing in Hawaii, hitched a ride with him to get back to Capitol Hill so he could be sworn in and vote. That was Senator Brian Schatz, who is still in the Senate today. So governors can and sometimes must move very quickly when they are up against a major deadline like we are right now, with potentially hundreds of thousands of federal workers either being furloughed or having to work without pay, including members of the military, if there is no swift resolution on government funding.
Yeah, it's a really good reminder. We want to add one more person to this conversation. CBS News congressional correspondent Nikole Killion is joining us now. Nikole, I mean, the news has really just been breaking over the last hour or so, less than an hour. I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of speak to any of the lawmakers, senators, representatives in the halls there, but can you give me a sense of what the mood is like?
Well, I think this news really just comes as a shock to many here on Capitol Hill. I mean, certainly the senator was an advanced age, but she was just here yesterday on the floor voting. And so this really does come as a surprise. As of now, some of the reaction has actually come from some of her Republican colleagues in the Senate, like Senator Tom Tillis, Senator Marco Rubio, also over in the House, Congresswoman Young Kim of California. We have not seen as of yet, for instance, Speaker Pelosi, who was a close friend, or the senator's colleague, Senator Alex Padilla, weigh in as of yet. Obviously, this news is still sinking in. We also have not received a formal statement from Senator Feinstein's office, but again have confirmed this news through multiple sources. So I think really everybody is kind of taking a step back, digesting this news about the loss of such a major figure here on Capitol Hill.
Indeed, and maybe you can also, because you were sort of there as well over the last, several months or so. What do you recall about her? Because sadly, one of the things we will be saying as we talk about her is that there was this conversation about her decline and whether or not she was still capable of representing California. And there was a significant amount of time where she was not in Washington.
Well, look, the senator has been through a lot. She battled shingles earlier this year. Just recently, she suffered a minor fall. So her health has been in decline. After that shingles episode, when she finally did return here to Capitol Hill, she did lighten her load a bit as far as her schedule. She did still take part, for instance, in Judiciary Committee meetings and hearings, but not necessarily every single one. And she did, of course, vote as well for multiple, nominations and pieces of legislation as they came to the floor. But that being said, just in talking to a lot of senators about this overall issue of age, first and foremost, I think many of the senators here do have a lot of respect for Senator Feinstein, both Republican and Democrat. And oftentimes when we would ask about this issue, they really deferred to the senator and said that this is her decision. So, at the end of the day, she did make this decision to continue to serve. And she has been a longtime public servant. So that is certainly within her right. And, that is the general consensus really among a lot of the senators that we talked to. Obviously, recently we saw the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell plagued by some health challenges. And we have seen other senators, even younger in age, who have also faced various health battles. And again, the consensus continues to be that this is really a personal decision for a lot of these senators to make that call for themselves if they have that capability to serve. You can also point to other senators, for instance, Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley. He just turned 90 himself earlier this month, and many senators point to him as someone who continues to serve with a lot of vigor and energy here in the Senate. So it really is a personal situation and decision for many of these lawmakers. Obviously, everyone's situation and circumstance is different, but many senators by and large felt that Senator Feinstein was doing what she thought was best.
So just to remind everyone that we are talking about Dianne Feinstein, Senator Dianne Feinstein. We got the news earlier today that she had passed away. Vlad is now joining me. She was 90 years old, and we're talking about she has been representing California in some way, shape, or form for more years than not. She was the first female mayor of San Francisco. She served for 3 terms there. She is the longest-serving U.S. senator from California, and also became the longest-serving female senator in U.S. history. And because of that, she has been instrumental in a range of legislation that has been incredibly impactful, from gun legislation, from same-sex marriage legislation, protecting religious rights. You name it, she's had a hand in some of this stuff.
You know, Anne-Marie, you point out that her legislation and the focus of her career in politics has focused on legislation directed at same-sex marriages, and specifically gun legislation. And as you know, all of you know, Seth, Nikole, and Nancy, her political career started in the wake of the assassination of Harvey Milk, who was the city supervisor. You probably talked about that.
We did, but?
Yeah, Harvey Milk, who was the first gay man elected to public office in the United States, and the mayor of San Francisco, Mayor Moscone. And I sort of feel that tragedy, that horrific tragedy, sort of fueled a lot of her passion in the Senate.
Sure, and I think that, you know, I was just reminded, Vlad, of this amazing picture that our colleague Bo Erickson took several years ago of Senator Feinstein in the basement of the U.S. Capitol. She was talking to Senator Lisa Murkowski of Alaska, who's a Republican, a moderate Republican. And frankly, I can't remember the issue right now, but we'll have to find the picture and put it up. And there, in full view of everyone, she had her finger in Lisa Murkowski's face and was clearly lecturing her about how she should vote on some particular topic. She was tough. I mean, she was an arm twister. She was outspoken, and she didn't back down from a fight. I think part of the reason that it was so noticeable in recent years that she was diminished was because she was such a forceful speaker and so forceful in the U.S. Senate and so pivotal a figure in the U.S. Senate. Even though, frankly, I've covered some senators over the years. I've covered a lot of senators who have stuck around maybe one term longer than they should have. And it's not as noticeable because they were not, they weren't such major deal makers in the first place. They weren't out there forcefully making their case on the floor, in the committee room, the way that that Senator Feinstein was. They weren't working as hard as she was to get the gavel, to be the chair of a committee, to be the ranking Democrat or ranking Republican on a committee, knowing that that gives you so much more power, so much more visibility when you're trying to get your issues some attention and trying to get your legislation over the finish line. And so I think it was the fact that she had been such a singular figure in the U.S. Senate for so many years that it became extremely noticeable when that started to change. But, you know, this is a person who racked up so many firsts. First female mayor of San Francisco, as you were mentioning, Vlad. First female chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Longest serving woman senator ever. And very close with a number of the women in the U.S. Senate. And as Nikole was pointing out, with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi as well, they would travel back and forth to San Francisco, their hometown. They spent a lot of time talking. They spent a lot of time strategizing because they cared about a lot of the same issues. And obviously, they came from a similar political background and a similar philosophy.
Thank you all. We are going to have a lot more on the death of Senator Dianne Feinstein. We're going to take a quick break. But her legacy in Washington and California is one that will be remembered for the ages.
Yeah.
We have a couple of statements that are being released now from the lawmakers, and here's one in particular from Senator Chris Murphy. Guys, you may not have seen it as you've been on the air with us, but he writes this: from 1994, when she passed the assault weapons ban as a first-term senator. Until the tragedy in Newtown, Dianne Feinstein was a lonely voice fighting against gun violence. The modern anti-gun violence movement, now stronger than the gun lobby, would not exist but for Dianne.